You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
There are so many pressures in life. To go harder, to stay busier, to be endlessly worried about the state of the world, to the point that taking a break can literally feel forbidden. But like Mary Oliver says in Wild Geese, we are quite literally animals, not machines. Mary Oliver isn't alone in this thinking. I'm sure you're already anticipating their name, but Studio Ghibli is quite famous for this slow, peaceful philosophy too. It turned this philosophy into cozy movies, and now there's an entire subgenre hanging on this philosophy, one that's loved by many. Movies, TV shows, video games, books, even manga and poetry. There's Snoopy and Miffy, and Stardew Valley, and My Neighbor Totoro, and even Gilmore Girls. But what do they all have in common? And how can this even be considered radical? Cozy media itself can be described as movies, shows, books, and whatever other kinds of art out there that typically opt for slower pacing, lower stakes, enhanced aesthetics, and a thematic focus on warmth, joy, nature, and domestic optimism. Domestic optimism is a term I don't see often online, at least in this context, so I'll describe it to you with my own meaning for it as well. It's placing a greater value on daily, mundane life and the hope that can be fostered around it. Community, compassion, and obviously optimism. Because yes, the world can be an awful place, but your loved ones surely aren't all that bad. Neither are your neighbors or your mailman. Maybe your community is quite good actually, and maybe that's what matters at the start. There's a lot that sets this style and line of thinking apart from conventional media. It's less active and pessimistic than most stories are nowadays, even when we don't notice them to be, and this is to the point where most of the time cozy media lacks a true villain at all. Instead, the conflict and development can more often come from the inside of characters, or they're spurred on from outside forces like the environment, replacing the traditional good versus bad setup that most Western media is used to. And, of course, you can't forget about the aesthetics. To be cozy, it has to look cozy, after all. So what are some examples of this cozy media? I mentioned Studio Ghibli already, and it's probably the most obvious example of this genre, rightfully so. The animation quality is unmatched, and every movie feels like leagues more creative than most anything big animation studios like Disney and Pixar have come up with in decades, except maybe Sony Animations. But I love them. Of course, you could explain this with a number of reasons. There's the timeless art style, the beautiful soundtracks, and the wonderful feeling of watching these gorgeous animated movies without really understanding what's going on with the plot. However, right now let's focus on the philosophy driving these Studio Ghibli works. There's an array of Asian belief systems that clearly influence the movie, from Shinto to Buddhism to Taoism. I found a couple really interesting articles about it actually, and I'll link them in the description for anybody who'd like to take a look. Princess Mononoke is a great example of Shinto within Miyazaki's movies, as one of the main themes deals with the purity that brings harmony with the gods. In Mononoke, this lack of purity translates to pollution by mankind, brought on by hatred. There's a lot more that goes on with the Shinto religion and Princess Mononoke, but I'm hoping you catch my drift here. I personally really love the very heavy environmentalism that Studio Ghibli presents in their films, and I could make an entire video just about that. Let me know if that sounds interesting. Anyways, one of the biggest influences that Studio Ghibli draws from Buddhism, Taoism, and Shinto are the absence of people that are wholly good or evil. There's more of an emphasis on balance, natural states, and good versus evil traits and behaviors rather than good versus evil people. It's an interesting way of thinking. And it's also one of the key features in Studio Ghibli films that set them so obviously apart from other animated movies, and other media and pop culture in general, at least in the West. Hence, Studio Ghibli's coziness. Another kind of predictable point is the cozy gaming genre. It's unfortunately been turned into a bit of a sham to get people to spend money on subpar copycats of other games, but the staples of the genre are still really beloved for a reason. My favorite is Stardew Valley. It keeps this slice-of-life narrative that the cozy genre leans towards, even if it adds some fantastical elements to it. Just from the intro alone, you can tell that the game critiques capitalism pretty heavily. You leave a dead-end job working for a mega corporation to move off to the countryside and start your grandpa's old farm back up again. Turning into a multimillionaire farmer isn't exactly Karl Marx approved either, but the game still rejects that idea of running on a hamster wheel for life. Instead, you grow it yourself, or something. There's also Animal Crossing, which is definitely not Karl Marx approved, but still, it's cozy. In both games, you get to exercise a healthy amount of control over your surroundings, especially over their aesthetics. It feels quite healing, at least for me. There's also that appreciation of community here too, with both games pushing you to reach out to the villagers and connect with them. Maybe one of these days I'll do Stardew Valley character analysis, now that I think about it. Who do you all like the most? Or who do you hate the most? Anyways, this is a genre scope video, so I need a literary example here too. Mary Oliver is the perfect pick for this. Remember the cold open for this video? You do not have to be good. Her. She's quite similar to Studio Ghibli in philosophy, like I said, although probably less spiritual. A lot of her poems are really just lovely descriptions of nature and then connecting them back emotionally towards humanity's way of life. One of my favorites is Morning Poem. I'll show it here for a minute, pause if you want to read it. The brief summary of its themes are the inherent hope that comes with each morning, and comparing it to a sunrise seen on a pond scattered field of lilies. Very beautiful. My final example is admittedly more like an offhand comment, Gilmore Girls. It's not my favorite show by any means, but it's rightfully praised for the cozy fall vibes. It's also a really good example of how slice of life plots work. Nothing really happens in the show, but you just watch the characters go about their daily life. When it's in a wonderfully beautiful town like Stars Hollow, Gilmore Girls perfectly hits that romanticization aspect that cozy media might as well trademark. Studio Ghibli might be romanticizing nature walks and countryside living and self-care, but Gilmore Girls romanticizes academia, at least in the earlier seasons. All of this romanticization, though, does not a plot make. So how does this genre of media where nothing happens enthrall us so much? To explain this, we're going to do a quick detour into some narrative theory. Not all stories have the same type of conflict, hero versus villains. That's something we already know. But what other types are there? Well, actually there's quite a lot. There's man versus man, which is hero versus villain. There's man versus society, kind of like the Joker. There's man versus supernatural, like in the Odyssey. There's man versus environment, like Sharknado. And then there's man versus technology, like in the Terminator, or Megan. Some of these cozy genre stories can follow one of these external conflict types, where something happens to the character that affects the plot. Paddington would be a classic man versus society example, and Ponyo would be man versus supernatural and maybe environment. They still avoid that man versus man conflict type if they can, though. However, all cozy stories across the board will have internal conflicts. These are the problems that happen within the character that affect them inwardly. Motivations, goals, personalities, values, mental states, they're all internal conflicts that can change throughout the plot. Within more conventional stories, internal conflicts aren't that necessary. Although, in my opinion, that's like only eating plain toast, but to each their own, I guess. Internal conflicts are the emotional hook of the story, and it's hard to make a good story without that. As for external conflicts, making a good story can be quite simple without focusing on them, if you know what you're doing. One example we already went over is slower pacing and lowered stakes. This way, the story can breathe. You're not pushed from one scene to the next like on a roller coaster, but instead you get to watch the characters live, like a Ferris wheel, or probably a nature walk. Studio Ghibli ensures this by forcing their audience to take breaks even in the middle of their films. You get to watch all this cool, magical stuff happen in Howl's Moving Castle, or Ponyo, or Princess Mononoke, and then you watch the characters eat dinner and tidy their house. And then back to the cool, magical stuff. Those silent moments can be quite meditative. So can the scenery and aesthetics in cozy media. Mary Oliver, Studio Ghibli, Stardew Valley, honestly all the examples I listed are unequivocally quite nice to look at and listen to. There's Mary Oliver's intensely descriptive and nature-focused style. There's the charming small towns in Gilmore Girls and Stardew. There's the beautifully peaceful music and low-key voice acting to keep you relaxed. This genre makes you feel good. It's focused on making you feel good, whether it be through comfort, nostalgia, compassion, or even just contentment and empathy. There's a lot that goes into how this genre makes so many people so happy. And some of this can be explained by the psychological effects these great qualities to cozy media can actually provide with the audience. They offer an escape from the very overstimulating and often stressful daily life. It's even linked into conventional media and culture, especially with the current state of things around the world. Watching an episode of Gilmore Girls or playing some Animal Crossing can feel like a mini vacation from all the turmoil, especially with the lack of stress within all the plots with these types of stories. Like I said, no villains, and all of the characters are treated with so much compassion that it can be very healing. Media like this more often villainizes certain traits or values over specific people. For example, greed itself is evil, but greedy people aren't completely evil. They're just people who make greedy decisions for one reason or another. So without any big stakes or big villains, it's honestly all around just a peaceful experience, much like ASMR. The quiet sounds, the slow pace, the satisfying visuals, it's often linked to improved moods and lowered anxieties after watching, or reading or playing, I guess. And this next little effect isn't one I see mentioned much, but this type of media can really help with productivity and self-care, especially when you're neurodivergent. This is through a process called body doubling, kind of like a monkey see, monkey do type thing. Gilmore Girls and Studio Ghibli are particularly famous for this effect, although the former is usually for studying, and the latter is more for cleaning, cooking, and getting all those mundane chores out of the way in a very less dreary way than usual. The most interesting aspect to this mass cozy appeal, though, is the philosophical side, at least to me. Much of this art will focus on a unity with nature, like we already went over with Studio Ghibli. They have lots of eco-feminist ideas, and that could be an entire video by itself. And across the whole cozy media genre, there's this complete ignorance towards anything relating to hustle culture. What does matter is living well, whether that's productively or not. This whole living well ideal works particularly well when the scenery is just so beautiful, but there's also something to be said about appreciating the inherent beauty of the world in general. Cozy media like this is always very radically optimistic, and I think all of these mini philosophies really encompass that. All of these philosophies and these psychological tidbits and these writing techniques are just pieces of the cozy puzzle. It's really a valuable genre that deserves more recognition, and if you watched all the way through this video, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume you agree. Please leave a comment to tell me your thoughts. I love reading what all of you guys think, and thank you so much for watching.